I'd like to start by telling a story about the founder of Learnship Networks GmbH, who I represent. I'm the director of pedagogy at Learnship, and the company was founded in 2008 by two men, but I'll tell the story about one in particular. That's Sushil Bigyanat. And Sushil was a consultant for the Boston Consulting Group. He did assignments in England, he did work in China and India, and during that time he had this idea in his head, he tells the story, of founding a language school. But it would be an edtech platform, and this is going back to probably early 2000s. Sushil went on to join RTL and RTL Online, and if you don't know Cologne, it's quite a big media city in Germany. And so Sushil got his break, I guess, in the TV industry, and then on the online side of the entertainment world. They founded Learnship, and they had to make a decision. What kind of platform was this going to be? And I am very grateful to Sushil for deciding, or betting, on trainer-led instruction in language training. At the time, there was a lot of investment in self-paced solutions. But Sushil is possessed of strategic intelligence and looked at the engagement figures, and this has not changed. A paper I read recently, it was published in January 2019, talks about 1 to 16% of people actually finishing a self-paced learning course. That's when you've removed the trainer from the equation. It's not a great bet. Sushil invested in humans, he invested in the trainer, and what I'd like to talk about today is why I believe that's the right choice, and I'd like to refer to various aspects of academic endeavor to support the claim. So this is The Irreplaceable Human. You're with Rob Szabo. Thanks for coming. In 2014, the IATEFL organization, that's the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language, they had a conference in Harrogate in Yorkshire. And there was a controversial plenary which was given by Sugata Mitra. And it started a real brush fire which became a blaze on social media. There was one line in his presentation which really set teachers off. Okay, he spoke about taking the teacher out of the equation. Now, to be fair to the man, he was talking about rural India, where he'd seen the further you got away from Delhi, the worse kids were performing in school. And he was saying, well, you know, that's not great, that's not really fair. Can we replace the teacher with advanced computer systems and give these kids a better chance? That's really where he was coming from. But there was a real powerful reaction, and I found it fascinating. Hugh Deller is a respected EFL blogger, writer, teacher, trainer, based at the University of Westminster in London. And he launched a kind of broadside on his blog, actually even on stage in Harrogate at the time. Sugata Mitra is selling his brand of the education is broken mantra coming out of Silicon Valley specifically, and the neoliberal doctrine in general. And the comments were quite exciting. Scott Thornbury got involved. You know, many of the sort of leading lights of the EFL world got involved and had their say. Now, I don't want to talk today about politics or, you know, socioeconomic conditions or people being scared of the fourth industrial revolution, losing their jobs and things like that. I think that is part of the world that we're living in. I think that's the context we're talking about. I don't want to address that. I want to look at the claim that you can take the teacher out of the equation successfully and subject it to some form of rigor and see if it emerges. I don't think it does. I'll share that with you. And firstly, a word of warning. This is from Philip Kerr, another respected EFL blogger. He says, predictions about the impact of technology on education have a tendency to be made by people with a vested interest in the technologies. And if you've been walking around conferences like this, you may find that it rings true with your experience. I think even in the edtech world, even when we're working on exciting developments, when we are working with product managers and developers and we're launching beta runs and all this kind of stuff, let's keep in mind what we're trying to achieve, not leave education out of the edtech combination. Now, there are a lot of people worried about this fourth industrial revolution. I've had a lot of EFL trainers approach me via LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter and so on and say, Rob, are we going to still have jobs, in 5 years, 10 years? Is simultaneous translation going to get so good you don't need us anymore? You've got these devices, the in-ear, the babblefish, that sort of stuff emerging. My answer is you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. This is the Brookings Institute from October last year. They're one of the most respected think tanks in the States. I like this line. The education profession is unlikely to see a dramatic drop in demand for employees given the nature of work. In the field, rather, preparing students for the changing labor market will be a central challenge for schools and educators. And at some point, I think the edtech world in language training will wake up to this. I'm glad Sushil realized this early on. Here we can see these are the resilient human skills. Humans are actually quite incredible at the speed of processing that they're capable of, the creativity that they have, and the flexibility of the mind. And you can see, look at the top few skills. These are nightmares for AI programmers. Complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity among them. But look at the other interpersonal skills, which are absolutely massively important. And when we're teaching language training, we're predominantly a B2B provider. You can't really extricate that stuff from strong business communication skill training. That's front and center. I'd like to go a little bit deeper into what it means to learn a language. Now, early AI systems designed to teach work on what's called a domain knowledge model. For mathematics or for science, you may be able to build systems which have a linear track of material to be covered. You may have some degree of adaptability there in terms of the speed that items are presented to you. But ultimately, it's possible to score 10%, 75%, 100% and dominate that domain, right? Language doesn't work like that. You can't build a system like that for language. And this is what people are starting to wake up to when they try. It's a category error to assume that you can build these systems for language learning. Let's go a little bit deeper into the applied linguistics literature. Business discourse is about how people communicate using talk or writing in commercial organizations in order to get their work done. Now, part of that is knowledge, linguistic knowledge. You need to know your verbs and your nouns and your tenses and things like that. Your prepositions, get that right. But the thing is that all of that language is happening within a sort of semiotic web. You're interacting with other people. You're interacting with people at different status levels. You're interacting with people where you may want to share more or less information. There's nuance, there's humor, there's irony. It's complicated. And we get into the world of pragmatic competence. This adds a layer of complexity to what AI would have to do to replace the language teacher. And it may be fundamentally impossible even to establish as an a priori claim, which people have done, and I'll get onto that. A priori, by the way, means before empirical observation, just by following the lines of logic through. Yeah, I like the French terms for this, you can't say this in English, but I'm in Paris. But there's a difference between savoir and savoir-faire, knowledge and knowledge of how to do things, the ability to do things. And I don't want to bore you with a lot of text, but I think this is an important slide. By the way, this is page 1 of the Common European Framework for Reference for Languages. That's a very important document published by the Language Policy Unit in Strasbourg, the European Commission. And I want you to count the number of references to human on that slide. The writers of this document were at pains to stress how human communication actually is. We must never forget it. I've highlighted as well, communication calls upon the whole human being. The competence is separated and classified below, interact in complex ways within the development of each unique human personality. And finally, there's the kicker. It must be left to teachers and the learners themselves to reintegrate the many parts into a healthily developing whole. And if you've studied education theory, this is more or less constructivism. You can't pour knowledge like from a jug into a mug. You can't pour knowledge from a computer system into a human mind. It doesn't work like that. They won't remember anything. Engagement will drop. 1% will finish. All of your complex analytics programs will tell you in painstaking detail how nobody is logging in. And then you'll panic, and then you'll start to get people to call them or push notifications and send them an email every week or 3 a week. because it doesn't work. And it can be very expensive. Let's have a look at the limits of artificial intelligence. This is a quote that I quite enjoyed. This is from the MIT Technology Review. Machines that truly understand language would be incredibly useful, but we don't know how to build them. Why don't we know how to build them? Probably because we don't know how the human mind works. And people have a lot of theories, but our knowledge is still, in 2019, relatively superficial in how it actually works when we're engaged in language or communication. Scenarios. This is Fei-Fei Li, director of the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab. Humans are terrible at computing with huge data, and that is where AI can be of massive help. This is powerful technology. I do not want to understate that. I'm talking about replacing human teachers in the language classroom. I don't want to go beyond that claim. But we are great at abstraction and creativity. And I think you can draw a very clear line between abstraction and creativity and linguistic performance. Machine learning and neural networks are being applied with ever-increasing frequency to the problem of natural language programming, not neurolinguistic programming. That's a common misunderstanding of the term. But it doesn't solve the problem of engaging in human conversations. The intelligence missing from artificial intelligence is missing. Chris Lonsdale. Now this guy is interesting, John Searle. John Searle is still teaching and writing. He's a professor of philosophy at Berkeley in California. He's an important man. We've got time for a short thought experiment. Has anybody read the Chinese room thought experiment? Are you familiar with it? I'll take you through it very quickly. It takes me back to my days as an undergrad studying philosophy at Rhodes University in South Africa. And I remember the lecture. It was a morning, and it sort of changed my life. Anyway, so you have a room, okay, and it's locked. There's a man outside the door, and he takes a bit of paper, okay, and on the paper are some symbols, and he slides it under the door, okay. Paper disappears. It's been taken by somebody else. Paper comes back out with different symbols on the outside, okay. Now, the paper that went under the door was actually Chinese, okay? It was a set of Chinese questions, and very coherent, very intelligent answers come back under the door. But what happened inside the room, okay? Now, we'll go inside the room and we'll see. There's a table in the middle of the room, and there's a big book on the table. And inside the book, there's a line of code, and then it says, if this, then that. And he takes the paper and he looks, okay, so line 17, and I have to do that. And he does so, accurately, fast, right? Perfectly, like a machine does, and puts it back under the door. Now, to the man outside the door, there's every evidence that the person inside understands Chinese, but he does not understand Chinese. And this is how computers work. It is syntactic processing. If this, then that. Okay, nothing more. Nothing more. And here's John Searle. He's still writing, as I said. The Chinese room dates back to 1980. It's still being quoted by people like Werner Vinge, okay? Ray Kurzweil, the guy's talking about the singularity, people talking about machine sentience. They quote John Searle all the time. What he says here is important. Computation is defined purely formally or syntactically. Minds have actual mental or semantic contents. And we cannot get from the syntactical to the semantic just by having syntactical operations. It does not matter how powerful your CPU is. You can't do that. That would be magic. There's no line of explanation as to how that can be possible. It's a category error to assume. What computers can do is create an illusion of understanding, and you may have seen this with chatbots. The chatbots are fundamentally limited because you have to train these things. And at some point you'll realize the Turing test was actually more or less set up. Alan Turing, the code cracker from Bletchley Park in the Second World War, said that how you would know that a machine was thinking is if it could convince you that it was. Now, chatbots are getting close, but if you have sufficient time with a chatbot, you'll see how limited they actually are. And they tend to make inappropriate comments. They don't understand nuance. They can be surprised by humor, irony. They misunderstand various things. There's a reason for that. Okay, this is Michael Halliday. If you're not familiar with him, he was an Australian linguist. He was behind systematic functional linguistics. Really, really influential figure, and somebody that I base most of my pedagogy on when I'm at LearnShip designing business English programs, because he talks about how human communication is fundamentally functional, so you should organize it as such when you study it. That means that you might be accepting or refusing or offering and so on. This is, by the way, very close to how the outcomes are structured for the Common European Framework levels. It's in what you can achieve in the world with other people. Anyway, what's important here is that humans are operating on 4 levels of complexity, and computers are operating on 1 level of complexity. And that matters. Humans are exceptionally adept at navigating the semiotic plane. Okay, that's actually where a lot of humor comes from, double entendre, and things like that, right? When words have more than one meaning. And this is an important statement as well from the history of language teaching methodology. If we present the learner with language only as an object, as if it was separable from the learner's relevant psychological and social experience, we're almost certainly postponing development of the learner's ability to communicate through the language. What is language actually for? And there's a fairly fundamental question for all of us to consider, I guess, if you're in the game. Now, language arguably developed actually not for communication, but for organizing thought and for making abstract thought possible. It's a tool used for communication, sure, okay? But if you want to get good at communicating with other human beings, I suggest that you do it as often as possible. And that time spent in front of a computer can only help you in a very limited way, and even with AI chatbots playing the role of the virtual tutor, I don't think you'll get very far for all of the reasons that I've commented on so far. It is not a static object, it's a dynamic, living beast. At this point, we have a bit of time. Are there any questions? I wanted to leave a bit of time for this because I think it's something that you can get your teeth into, possibly before lunch.
So what I gather is any approach that's not at least blended learning, which is what presence learning plus some sort of digital aspect, is useless. But what would you say there's a percentage?
I think useless is a strong word.
It is a strong word, very strong, yeah. Okay.
No, I wouldn't claim that. What I would say is that removing the human teacher for reasons of cost or operational efficiency is misguided.
Yes.
That's what I would say. I think blended learning is very interesting, and I'm actually a great supporter of blended learning programs. I mean, homework has been used in schools for years and years, and there's nothing wrong with going home and studying, you know. But when you're talking about language learning, it's no longer just translating from Latin into Greek, or you know, it's been talking to other people since the communicative approach in the 70s. And I don't think that changes because now we have technology which makes things cheaper.
Right. And do you still do some blended though? Yes.
Oh, we do.
Okay, because I wasn't very familiar with your product.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's important. Look, pragmatically, I think when you talk to HR departments and you talk to purchasing managers, what they're looking for in the tenders tends to include an element of self-paced or blended.
I
think there are various
search the information for themselves when they need it.
And there are various pragmatic reasons for that. But I think what is probably a claim that I would definitely avoid is that you can make sound Common European Framework communicative progress simply through a self-paced solution with no human trainer, or very irregular access to a human trainer. So I've seen all kinds of things in the industry because they're led by a commercial imperative. But I think what's absolutely critical now in the next sort of step, because my company is no longer a startup, we're maturing, and what I find very important when we're doing product development and things like that, or responding to large tenders, is that the pedagogy of things, the curriculum, the methodology, the assessment, the trainer, is at the heart of the product design. That your IT guys are there, that your salespeople are there, marketing, strategic direction is set by the CEO, but pedagogy has to be in the room in a very, very meaningful way. And to answer your question, I would never claim that it's useless, but I see a risk in the industry of undervaluing the human trainer. And what I've also seen is companies attracting quite a lot of investment, putting it into tech platforms, neglecting the trainer side, and failing on the trainer-led piece.
And saying, okay, here it is, it's done.
I'm sorry?
And giving them the tool and say, okay, here it is, it's done, but you have to know how to use it to be...
Well, absolutely right. I mean, what people forget is that we're fundamentally still schools. So we should be preparing trainers, we should be observing them, we should be providing professional development, we should be providing peer groups for them to exchange lesson plans and notes, and all those sorts of things that you would do if you believe the trainers are important, qualified, valuable people, and they add to the prospect that you're selling in the marketplace. And I think that it probably encapsulates the message I'd like to impart today, that it's not going to be artificial intelligence that rides like a white knight to make training cheap. And I think that illusion has not been dispelled, but I believe it will be, and it's only a matter of time, I think, before it starts sinking in. However attractive it may be to purchasing managers. But, you can create very cool self-paced tools, and there are certain things you can do very well, I think. I think grammar rules and things like that, or potentially when you want to write, then you probably want a little bit of privacy and you want to do it on your own. But then I would really recommend getting a human being to grade it for you, and even to work through the process of writing. The process writing lesson is incredibly valuable, and not to see it as an output, if that answers your question.
Hello. I see that you do virtual classes. Are these virtual classes where people just log in and then it can be any teacher and anybody in the class?
No,
or is it it's a follow-up? It is a...
No, these are closed groups.
Yeah, it's their
these
proper
follow
teacher.
curricula.
Yeah,
it's a proper teacher.
Yeah. Okay.
It follows a set... It depends on the product that we're selling. I mean, we follow the Common European Framework of Reference.
Yeah.
So we do a placement test. We'll put people in classes. We'll match them with trainers, qualified native speakers or native level teachers. And it's an absolute analog experience as you would have in a well-resourced face-to-face traditional classroom.
Okay.
And that's what we want to bring globally. And so the tech investment is in quality video, quality audio, uninvasive tech to handle the admin side, to make homework easy, but everything designed to support the teacher in the classroom as it has been for so long, so successfully.
Thank you.
Okay, question?
Well, thank you for your presentation. I share everything, honestly. And I have just a comment rather than a question that, what you said applies to any subject, not only to languages. Because if you think to STEM, there are any way to prove a theorem in mathematics, and the limit is only the creativity. So you can follow different paths. There is not one only solution. So
I take your point, and it's not my background, and by no means do I mean to understate the creativity required in mathematics, which is a pure and beautiful intellectual pursuit. But yes, I think that the claim could be more generally made. But if you follow what's happening, you'll see more and more sort of large corporate concerns making these claims, and I think the risk is massive. That you have a generation of people who can no longer create, who are incredibly narrow, and they lead themselves into all kinds of trouble. I mean, if you look at the last couple of years, we're a bit directionless, if you ask me. I mean, I don't want to go into that sort of direction. But fundamentally, for me, education is a noble pursuit. I think it happens between a teacher and a learner, and it's essentially a human undertaking. And the technology should still support us and not dominate or become the master in any way. Yeah.
Yeah, and another just comment on the last part about the potential impact of artificial intelligence. I mean, the only impact that we can have in that case could be if we would have a strong AI, which is actually not even at reach, I don't know, for hundreds of years, I don't know.
I want to pick up on that point very briefly. I know I've just got a couple of minutes. Strong AI versus weak AI is an important distinction. Weak AI is what you'll see in chatbots, basically, which can operate within narrowly defined syntactic parameters. And so as a language teacher, I could imagine a chatbot that you use. I think Google demonstrated this, where you book an appointment, right? And within very narrowly defined tape scripts, with very sort of fixed phrases, chatbot can do that, no problem. When you start to vary off script, chatbot has problems. Strong AI would be, or it's also referred to as general artificial intelligence. That's a different beast completely. And you're absolutely right, we're very far away from that. In fact, Werner Vinge, this futurist that I mentioned earlier, he said we may never get there, to be honest. You know, that is something almost unimaginable for him, and that's his life, is studying and writing about it. And you're right, I think nothing less than general AI could replace a human being in the classroom.